Inside everything.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Strategy Inside Everything. Today we have a really, really special guest. I have been getting crushed in the Amazon book sales department by our next guest, whose book consistently, thanks a lot, Richard, has been outselling mine. And every time I log on to Amazon, it shows up as a reminder on top of my book. So thanks a lot. Richard Shotton is here from joining me today from the UK. He is the Deputy Head of Evidence at MGOMD, and the aforementioned book is a fantastic read called The Choice Factory. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. Not too bad. How are you?
I'm doing great. I should say tonight. I guess where you are, it's evening. Here, it's in Arizona. It's the morning.
Yeah, it's a lovely, warm, unseasonably warm day for London here.
Hey, Richard, would you mind giving people unseasonably warm? You crack me up. It's like 105 here, so I have no pity. I have no pity for you whatsoever. Would you mind giving people a sense of your background, and then I want to talk a little bit about what motivated you to write The Choice Factory, and then we'll dive into our topic.
So my background is as a media planner. I started in 2000, and about probably 5 or 6 years ago, I moved from media planning into research. And my particular interest, while I was a media planner and then especially as a researcher, was how findings from social psychology, or sometimes called behavioral science, can be applied to advertising.
What made you switch from media to research? What triggered that switch?
I think we had a problem at my old agency that many agencies find, which is the research department had been kind of decoupled from the agency a little bit. It becomes slightly standalone. So we thought it would be good to try and reintegrate into the agency. So rather than bringing a researcher in to look after it, had a planner go and look after it. And
that's fantastic. So they chose somebody from the inside to start looking at those questions and with the perspective of media planning and buying.
That's right. We kind of flipped the importance. The importance stopped being the methodology, and it started becoming, well, what are the media planning questions we can answer? And it gave me a really good chance to kind of bring behavioral science to the fore.
That's really cool. So was that the trigger for writing The Choice Factory, or was that switch part of that trigger?
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of that. I think there's a post-rationalization and a kind of genuine answer. The genuine answer is there was a little bit of laziness that got me to write it, in that I was running lots of experiments for clients. And after I run the experiment, someone would come up to me in the agency and say, "Oh, remember that experiment you ran for Lexus? Can you show me the results? I think it might be relevant for a problem I'm facing." And unfortunately, my filing system was pretty awful, and my presentational style is generally just images on slides. So I could either never find the results, or I just had 3 slides with images on, which was pretty useless.
Right, not enough.
I had to rerun the experiments all the time. And what I thought then was, well, rather than wasting my time doing this, rerunning them, I know I'll write them up, send them to Marketing Week or campaign, and then when people come and ask for details, they're there online. I can just send them a link and save myself loads of time. After about 6 months,
you're the first person who I ever heard say that you wrote a book out of laziness. Yeah. That's pretty interesting perspective on it.
Yeah. Well, after about 6 months, I had all these different arcs. I thought, this could be the good basis, the good raw material for a book. So, yeah, there was no real plan. It kind of grew, luckily, and serendipitously from laziness.
Well, the data that you're pulling from to write the book is powerful stuff. So. Your laziness finally paid off. I'm sure there's teachers and professors and people in your past that are applauding your laziness now that were critiquing it then.
Yes, well, it's got to pay off sooner or later. The post-rationalization, the other angle is, well, I did genuinely think there was I was genuinely surprised by the fact of how little attention agencies pay to psychology. And yes, that's changing. Yes, there's a bit more of an interest. But considering the job we do and the fact that pretty much everything we are trying to do as marketers is change behaviour, whether that's get people to pay more, switch brands, buy our product more regularly, all of it is behaviour change. So it seems slightly crazy that we're not spending half the day talking about what essentially is the science of behaviour change. So
Right.
that's the kind of more rational answer that I felt we should be giving this topic far more attention. And while there are lots and lots and lots of books about popular psychology, there aren't that many that then take those biases and take those findings and apply them to advertising.
You're dead on. Yeah, I agree. I wonder, since you said half of the time we spend talking about behavior change and consumer psychology, what do you think is the other half, just out of curiosity?
Oh, well, I mean, even if you know all these biases and think about the broad applications, what I think one of the most exciting parts is it's still only a launch pad for a great creative or to think about how they can apply them. So it's still, I wouldn't claim it's the only thing we have to do. I think it's a very important part of our role.
Yeah, it makes it hard to make something with an intention if we don't understand how the intention is harnessed or how people will even receive it and what they might do with it. Right?
Absolutely.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit more about one of the chapters in your book, and since I read the book and since I preparing for this talk, I've been digging in a little bit on the pratfall effect, and I thought it'd be fun if the two of us could dive into just that one topic. I don't want to spend the whole time giving away all the pieces of your book, and I really do think people should read it. But pratfall effect in particular is something that I don't remember until I heard it in your voice. I don't remember reading about it, or I don't think I was even aware of it. So, do you want to give people a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, sure. It's it's quite an old bias. There was a professor of psychology at Harvard University called Elliot Aronson. And in 1966, he ran this wonderfully ingenious experiment. He got an actor to take part in a quiz, and he gives the actor the answers. So the actor, unsurprisingly, does really well. He gets 92% of the questions right. But then as the actor is finishing and he's won the quiz by miles, he stands up and makes a small blunder. He makes a pratfall. He knocks a cup of coffee down himself. And then Aronson takes that recording and he plays it to people. And he plays the recording in one of two versions. Either they hear everything, they hear the great quiz question answering and the mistake, or they just hear the great quiz question answering. And then Aronson asks people, well, look, how appealing do you find this contestant? And he finds that the participants, find the contestant significantly more appealing if they hear the mistake as well. And Aronson calls this the pratfall effect. That's essentially the idea that people, in Aronson's experiment, but later on it was shown to work with products as well, people or products who exhibit a flaw become more appealing.
That's such an interesting insight. What do you think it is? Is it vulnerability? Is it relatability? You've spent a lot more time thinking about this. What is it that
I think you're right. I think it's a fascinating bias because firstly, it's a bit counterintuitive. And one of the criticisms of behavioural science is, isn't this just stuff we can work out ourselves? But the pratfall effect is a lovely example of something that goes against our initial feelings. And I think the reason, there's a few reasons. I think one reason is consumers assume advertisers don't tell the truth. They might be mistaken, but I think that's an assumption. Therefore, if you admit a weakness, you've tangibly demonstrated your honesty and you become more appealing. I think there's a second element of consumers assume all products are flawed. So if you don't tell them where your flaw lies, then they will assume it might lie somewhere important. And there's some lovely evidence for that done by Northwestern University. They looked at 111,000 product reviews and they found that when product reviews were near perfect, so, people were getting 4.9 or 5 out of 5, that actually fewer people were going on to buy that product than if
Isn't that funny? And how many rooms have you sat in with a client where you explain that? I never had the science to explain it, only common sense, that people are skeptical and their antenna are up. And if they only see 5-star reviews, it's too good to be true. And the client will say, well, yeah, but we don't want to promote bad reviews. If there's a way to hide them, let's hide them.
Yeah. Whereas this would suggest that's absolutely the wrong thing to do, because you won't. People have got a whole bank of experience that they're drawing on. They know through bitter experience that perfection is too good to be true. So if you haven't told them, then the consumer's not going to fill that void with positive thoughts. They may well think that flaw lies in somewhere very important, and therefore not go anywhere near it. And I don't know if you heard Rory Sutherland's take on budget airlines, which I always think is quite a nice example of the pratfall effect.
What was his example?
He says, look, when budget airlines launched, and he takes some European examples, but things like EasyJet and Ryanair, he says these were phenomenally strange things. One day you could fly from London to Paris for 200 quid. The next day it was a tenner, and that if those companies hadn't admitted a flaw, if they'd just said they're very, very cheap, his argument is consumers would have never stepped onto the planes. Because
you had to explain the trade-off.
Yes, exactly. And if you don't, people think it might come in safety. Once you say we give you a very poor service, people think, aha, that's where the deal is, and it's a very good deal, and I'll accept it. So
right, that's so funny. And even last year, or maybe it was 2 years ago, when Ryanair was talking about charging an additional fee for you to use the lavatory, it's like that's them just resetting that for you again, just saying, look, we're cutting here because we're trying to figure out how to keep the cost down, everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I must admit, I do have a suspicion, and this one is, gut feeling, so I've not got evidence of this one, but I do wonder if the pratfall effect and that admission of a flaw to make the trade-off understandable was necessary at the launch of Ryanair. I wonder if now it's so well accepted, the whole premise of a budget airline, whether it's needed, and should they be quite so aggressive in their pushing their kind of poor service. But that one I'm kind of that's unsure about.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And here in the U.S. we have Domino's that did the, they launched the remake of the brand with their 60-second spot admitting, the "oh yes we did," where they said, "Hey, our pizza's terrible. Here's focus groups that that we have that showed us that people are just not happy, and so we're doing everything over again." Are there other examples that you point to as brands taking that pratfall and winning with it?
Yeah, so I think if you think about some of the most successful brands of all time, it's remarkable how many seem to harness the pratfall effect. So think of VW back in 1959 with DDB, Ugly is Only Skin Deep, and America's Slowest Fastback. So admitting it was ugly.
Yep.
You've got the same agency doing the same trick again in 1962 with Avis admitting they weren't the most popular. You've got Listerine admitting how bad they taste. They taste you twice a day. Guinness, it's slow to pour. It's irritatingly slow to pour. Good things come to those who wait. Even I'd argue, and you're drifting into a couple of other biases here, but Stella, reassuringly expensive. It's interesting that if you just looked at some of the best performing advertisers, the pratfall effect comes up reasonably regularly.
I wouldn't have categorized Stella in there.
Yeah,
but I mean, in this context, I get it. Yeah, it's like here's a shortcoming. We're gonna use it front and center.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point in that you could argue there's an idea of here, being a Veblen good or expectancy theory where people use price as a shorthand for quality. There's a number of studies, but I think Ariely and Babashiv who've shown the same wine. When people are told it's more expensive, people believe it tastes better. So I think, if you just saw that on its own, you might think of it as, well, this is just an example of price being a determinant of quality, even unrelated to the actual quality of the product. But I think if you see it with those others, there's an element of they put that price, they weren't just subtle about it. They were quite open about its high price versus the competition.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Have you seen the new? I just saw a Snickers video today that was like an apology video about an ad.
No, I haven't seen this.
I'll send you a link right after, and I'll put it in. I'll put it in the show notes. But it was an ad. Their "You're Not You" campaign.
Oh yeah.
The payoff was you're irritable when you're hungry, and
Yes.
it was an ad that essentially a print ad they ran that said something like, you need to eat a Snickers, jerk, or something really like pointed and aggressively mean. And then the payoff was you're irritable when you're hungry. And then they did a video apologizing for it as if it was out of their control and they don't know how this thing got out.
Yeah.
It really plays into the pratfall effect of like, hey, we're only human and we fall victim to these things too.
Oh, lovely. Because I think that because when you were saying the earlier example of the dominoes, where it was a genuine apology, I mean, I almost wonder if that is something slightly different in that where I think those kind of classic campaigns of VW, Guinness, Avis, they weren't caught out with these problems and then apologised. They actively went out and embraced their flaw. And I wonder if there's a slightly different nuance between the two. I think my favourite approach is almost that kind of classic approach.
Oh no, great point. Because Domino's changed everything based on what they found versus embracing it like Lemon and all the classic VW ads, where it's like, this is what it is.
Yeah, because then I wonder if you almost the double benefit of going out and admitting those flaws before you're caught out is there is a related bias, which I don't actually mention in the book. I think it's by a lady called Francesca Gino, called the red sneaker effect. And what she argues is that to make a social transgression or to break a kind of social norm, you have to have lots of social capital. So her initial starting place for her experiments was an experiment where she went to academic conferences, this kind of early 2000s, late 90s. She went to academic conferences and she monitored, or she kind of rated people's formality of dress. So from suits and ties down to jeans and sneakers. And this was the time when the kind of academic norm would have been to dress smartly. And then she goes up to those people afterwards and says, how many citations have you got? Citations being a kind of a quantification of your success as an academic. She finds an inverse correlation between number of citations and formality of dress. And her argument is that it's only the successful people who can break the norm of dressing smartly. Others just wouldn't get away with it. And I wonder if that's some of the appeal of VW, in that there's an element of, well, God, these guys must be pretty confident about the amazing engineering behind their cars if they're prepared to tell us the weaknesses and they still expect to sell them. So I wonder if there's some red sneaker effect going on as well.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I love it. Have you in any of the experiments you've run, have you experimented around pratfall effect with brands that you've worked on? Have you dug into that and found any practical results, or is it looking back at campaigns and finding examples?
The one bit of experimentation we did do, there's an Australian psychologist who talks about the pratfall effect, a guy called Adam Ferrier, and he did a test where he flashed up 2 images of cookies and asked people to say which they prefer. And overwhelmingly in the audience, people say, we prefer the one on the left. And it turns out that of these 2 cookies, they are almost identical, but one has been, one's the original cookie with a rough flawed edge and the other one has a smooth edge. So he did this amongst a group of, like a conference, a behavioural science conference, to show that the flawed and the rough, certainly in food, is more appealing. And when we saw that, a colleague and I thought, that's done amongst an unrepresentative group. Let's see if it works against a nationally representative sample. So we did the same experiment among 626 nationally representative people and found that about 2/3 of people prefer the roughened flawed cookie, as an example of trying to show that this does work for products, not just people, as Aronson experimented on.
That's amazing. It was conclusive result?
It's a conclusive result. It's a nice large sample, and it's. I think that it all brings you back to there's the business arguments for applying behavioural science. So we can go through all the experiments, all the robust evidence for why you as a marketer should apply it. But I've also found that when you go and talk to clients, sometimes that leaves them a little cold. So there is an advantage of sometimes running a live experiment in front of them to show that they are as affected by biases as anyone else. And even though it has far less statistical weight or robustness, it can be a more effective way of persuading clients.
Oh, yeah. This is funny because that example you just gave of the cookie
Yeah.
plays into what's happening right now in marketing with influencers, where people are much more receptive to content from peers or from quote unquote influencers, and essentially the brand comes in third or fourth place of when I'm willing to engage with
Yeah.
a product. But I think as influencers get more and more slick and sophisticated, and we've seen this in the number of followers, that higher follower rate drops engagement. But I wonder too if the polish on a post, not having those rough edges and not having those things makes people suspicious, makes them suspect when they see like, it looks really polished. I wonder who really paid for that.
Yeah, I think there's a fair point on that. There are because it always varies a little bit by category, and I think but for food especially, and I think you're right as well for things like bloggers, that a floor suggests authenticity, handmade, small batch, all of which at the moment I think have quite positive connotations. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's one of those biases which is fascinating because it does feel very multi-dimensional. There are lots and lots of applications.
It can apply. Once I started reading about it, I could see it being applied everywhere. It's really interesting stuff.
I don't know if one of my favourites, and I often find this is the way, is brands. It's often small businesses or non-marketers who sometimes apply it best. And one of my favourite examples of the pratfall effect is Ian Banks. So he's one of the most respected authors in Britain, wrote from the mid-'80s to about 2015. And on his very first novel called The Wasp Factory, he insisted to the publisher that they ran the positive reviews as well as the negative reviews on the back cover. And when I say negative,
I love it.
They were genuinely scathing. So, for example, I think the Sunday Express, one of the popular papers, mid-market papers, said something along the lines of a silly, gloatingly sadistic novel, the literature of a horror video nasty. I mean, the Times called it rubbish, and he put those on the back page, and he attributed his kind of success and his breakthrough into the market by his use of the pratfall effect.
That's amazing, and especially at that time and place to get tied in with the video nasty era and that the zeitgeist around that and that culture and that point in culture was very clever. You probably got very lucky to be lumped in with that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There was the book is it's kind of certainly shocking. I think at the time, I think what he realised was lots of the positive blurbs will go on about how shocking this is, but if people are actually slagging off the book as being too far past the line, then that actually can be quite motivating.
Yeah, and those negative reviews, if you go back to the first example you brought up about product reviews on Amazon or Expedia or TripAdvisor, a lot of times what's negative for one person is just the beautiful rough edge for me. If it says, oh, there were so many kids there, I couldn't relax. Well, as a parent of two kids, I'm like, oh, awesome. There were so many kids there. Now I'm not worried about bringing my kids there and disrupting the whole place.
Absolutely. And what's interesting there is, and I don't know if this kind of works in America quite well. I don't have a good enough knowledge of the national press market and how regionalised yours is versus the papers here. But the papers here often take, firstly, a very political stance, and then secondly, almost a conservative with a small c stance versus a more modern stance. So he wasn't putting negative reviews from. He was putting negative reviews from a certain section of papers. So I think like the Daily Mail and the Sunday Express are known as being very traditional, conservative, and having insults from them probably appealed to the other half of the market. So I think you're right.
It's a badge. It's a badge of honor. Yeah, exactly. The context is everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a first-time author, well, if 50% of the population never want to speak to you, see you again, and 50% are open to buy you, that's quite a good success rate.
Oh, next run of books, I'm going to put some of the negative comments I've gotten on my book. Hopefully it'll help. There's plenty of those, so no problem. Let's talk about outside marketing. Before we started recording, you and I were chatting a little bit about pratfall, and Here in the U.S., we have Donald J. Trump, our illustrious president, and it seems that he is riding the pratfall effect almost to a certain second term. No matter what kind of gaffe he makes or what kind of crazy thing, they appear crazy to me, his popularity holds with his core audience. Is this in line with the pratfall effect, or is it he's not endearing himself to me over time? But
no, I don't. I mean, I wonder if that fits with what we're saying about your example of I don't like this restaurant because it has children, or when the Sunday Express is insulting a modern novel for being too cutting edge. I wonder if there's an element of the attacks, if they come always from the same political groups, they just, the opposition are emboldened even further because they define themselves by not being the people who are attacking. So that's one of the only second one is an interesting twist on Aronson's original experiment, because when I was explaining it to begin with, the actor had done remarkably well at the quiz. He's got 92% of the questions right. What Aronson also did, though, was get the actor to purposely get a lot of the questions wrong. So he only gets 30% of the questions correct, and then makes the pratfall. And in that scenario, people found him less appealing when they heard the pratfall as well as the quiz answers. And Aronson,
so competency is the core piece of context. Then after that, if he is vulnerable by some flaw or some kind of pratfall, then it increases
absolutely
the desirability or the appeal.
So I wonder, I mean, for Trump, does that competency come from his billions and his real estate success? I wonder if that, therefore he's got that competence and on top, the flaws are, they certainly make him feel more authentic maybe than other politicians. We've certainly had our own examples here, I think, where his star, I think, has started to wane. But Boris Johnson, he was kind of bumbling, made, there was a photo, he was doing a photo opportunity going down a zip wire, and the zip wire broke and he just hung there, in midair for 20 minutes. Now, I think for most politicians, this would be a kind of photo disaster. He kind of just rode it out, and it seemed to make him even more endearing at the time. So we've certainly had our own politicians who seem to have benefited from the pratfall effect.
Does the pratfall effect, and you can answer this either in the world of marketing and brands or anywhere, if I already am predisposed to like Boris Johnson, if I already am a supporter, I'm a member of that party, and I follow him, the pratfall effect, I get it. I see him hanging from that wire, and I go, oh my God, see, that's adorable. I like him even more today than I did yesterday. But as if his opposition or a brand that, someone that would never fly Ryanair, for example, have you seen any evidence or even just theorizing? Do you think it would be effective to pull new audiences in to help grow a brand, or is it more about solidifying and reassuring people that are already in the brand tent?
Oh, that is a very good question. I've never used it as an argument for overturning that kind of those group of rejectors. If I have been talking with clients about what can they do about rejectors, if someone really dislikes our brand, what can we do to overturn that? And my argument has normally been threefold. One is, well, why bother on one hand? That there's this idea called confirmation bias. So we interpret evidence through a lens of our existing feelings. So knowing that, it's actually quite hard to overturn someone's opinions. So if someone genuinely doesn't like your brand, can you not just make do with the vast majority of people who are, indifferent, mildly negative, or just not shopping regularly enough? So I think sometimes there's an argument for we don't have to be quite so grand in our marketing plans. Just getting people who quite like you to buy you a little bit more, or people who weren't buying you because they've just stopped out of they're falling out of the habit, just reactivating them. I think that could be a big enough goal in itself. So that's one argument. The second argument is there's this wonderful bit of research by Leon Festinger, who was at Stanford in the 60s, and he said that why confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is tricky to get around because the brain is very good at coming up with arguments to maintain its existing point of view. So he ran an experiment where he recruited members of a college fraternity. He played those people an audio argument about why college fraternities were morally wrong. But he either played it with no distractions, or the people listening also had to watch a silent film, so were distracted. And he found when he asked people about how persuasive they thought his argument was and what they thought about college fraternities now, people were more likely to have changed their opinion if they'd been distracted. As in the media planner, that's fascinating, because I think 99% of the time, or 99% of media planners, if you were told, look, we want to persuade rejectors of a brand that actually we're amazing, you would default to reaching people at a time of heightened attention, so we can get all these messages in front of them and give them lots of logical arguments about why our brand is amazing. But what Festinger says, I was going to say, Festinger says that's exactly the wrong thing to do. What you should do is not, let's say, reach them when they're watching a film, when you've got their full attention. You want to be reaching them when they're distracted, when they're doing something else. Maybe you should think about reaching them when they're listening to the radio and driving a car. That way, the brain is it's being used doing other things, so it's less able to generate these counter arguments and therefore becomes more persuadable.
That's incredible. So what you're telling me is I can go to all my clients and say, hey, media fragmentation and attention is great for your brand.
It depends on the challenge. If you feel, and I do have some skepticism about this, but if you feel you need to win over rejectors of your brand, then yes, a moment's distraction, all the Festinger evidence suggests it would be the right place to do it.
That's interesting, because I think there's so much focus now that the tide has turned from engaging your best customers to really people carrying Professor Sharp's torch of you have to go get new customers and grow your audience, and so figuring out how to take on rejectors is the new coin of the realm, I think, going for the next few years until we figure out the next thing we didn't know.
The third and final angle for trying to get people to kind of change behaviours, change their habits, is an argument about timing. And there's two different angles here. There's a paper by Catherine Milkman who termed the idea of the fresh start effect. And she says one of the reasons we don't like to change our behaviour is because we want to be consistent with our past selves. But she argues that we don't believe time rolls out in an even manner. We have social ways of categorising that time. So by week, by semester, by our, I'm 42, the one after I've had a birthday, that'll be a new unit of time. And she says these moments of temporal discontinuity are moments when people are more likely to change their behaviour because they see less link with their past self. Now that sounds a little bit, when I first read that, it sounded a little bit overblown. But what she does to prove it is some really nice data analysis. She looks at things like searches for terms like diets. She looks at university gym enrollment dates. And she looks at a website called Stick, when people make pledges to change their behaviour. And on all of those, she sees spikes at the beginning of the week, beginning of the month, beginning of the semester, and after people's birthdays. So what at first seems a little bit dubious, when she analysed the data, came up with a very strong backing. So the other point there would be, it's not just about the message and the argument or the content that you have. If you want to change someone's behaviour, there are certain times when people are far more prone to do it.
I've seen studies that echo that, and it makes a lot of sense. And by that logic, I would wonder if you had done any experiments testing. I think it applies most to things like diet, to fitness, to some of the examples you gave. I wonder if you've done any experiments or seen any practical experiments where you see
Yeah.
people, where we've tracked, Facebook or digital ads and see what receptivity is by day of week?
So, well, the experiment I've done a few times now, so we've done it over a huge sample, I think in totality, probably 7,000 or 8,000 people, was rather than day of week, we looked at a grander scale. So we looked at what we called life events. So things like getting divorced, getting married, getting retired, moving house. Really, really simple setup. First question on a survey, please tick the life events that you've undergone. Then people were asked 5 or 6 different questions just to throw them off the scent. They didn't see any link. And then the final question was, and we did this a couple of different ways, but for example, we said, please tick the categories in which you have tried a new brand, or please tick the categories in which you have got a new favourite. And what we found is that people who had undergone a life event in the last 6 months, on all the brands, all the categories, they were between 2 and 3 times more likely to have changed the brand they used. So it does seem to work outside of those things like you said about diets and exercising, quitting smoking, even on commercial products. So we looked at things like the type of makeup you use, the coffee shop you drink at. Even on those things, people's behaviour does change after a major life event.
Was there one life event that rose to the top that drove more change, or was it pretty consistently
that's
the
a
idea?
very good question. So it varied very much by category. So what we found was this kind of general finding that it seems like people's habits are destabilised when they undergo these life events, and therefore at least they go back into the market. But for every category, there were particular life events that were important. So for example, on makeup, we found that people who just got divorced, people who had just started at university, and people who had just started at work were off the scale in terms of switching and changing brands. And I think the argument there would be, well, those life events were particularly pertinent because people were changing their social set. Therefore, the need to look that much more beautiful or to project a bit more confidence suddenly had greater importance. Because frankly, if you're still with the same people you've known for 10 years, they kind of know who you are and you don't have to adopt any.
Right. There's nobody to impress. Yeah.
So yes.
Well, I've read studies too that say, as it relates to fitness, that fitness in midlife is more of an indicator that someone is preparing for a divorce than it is of someone coming from a divorce.
Okay. I don't think that makes sense. We didn't look at fitness. The ones that linked really well with the divorce were, I think, foreign travel, going away on, I can't remember exactly the term we used, and makeup. But that would also make sense, I suppose, if you are coming up to that divorce and kind of re-entering the market, if that's the right term, that you'd suddenly start being interested in your appearance. Yeah.
That's why I keep canceling my wife's gym membership. I don't want her leaving me. You know what I mean? I don't want her getting any big ideas.
Yeah.
What else can you tell me about the Choice Factory for the people that are listening?
Yeah.
I feel like everybody who listens to this show probably definitely would benefit from it and probably has heard of it. So give them something that will nudge their behavior and get them over the line.
I think that the things I've tried to do with it are, well, I've argued about why I think it's really relevant, the general topic. And then beyond that, I've tried to look at biases that I think are less well known, things like the pratfall effect. So hopefully there will be new news to everyone who reads it. And the third bit I've tried to do is make it very practical. So what I found was I read lots and lots of books on this topic, and often they just stop at describing what the psychological biases are or the findings of academics. What I wanted to do was, one, prove that these things affect commercial brands. I went out and did my own experiments, and all the data's in the book. And then the bulk of every chapter is, look, now you know about one of these 25 biases. This is what you should do differently. This is how you should change your pricing. This is how you should think about promotions. This is how you should think about your creative or your media buying or your media planning. So I was very concerned about trying to make it as practical as possible.
Well, that's what I loved about it, and that's why I think there's a real benefit to reading it, not just from a lot of books are theory and you can expand your mind or open your mind to new ideas, but you bring it all the way to practical. Here's proof. Here's empirical proof that this matters to your job, and it matters to the problems you're trying to solve for your clients and for your customers. So I just think it's a really valuable text.
And then the nice bit is, I'm sure
well done.
listeners will have this huge variety of different problems. The great thing about behavioural science is there's a wealth of different biases. There's 100 biases that have been discovered, 100 plus biases. So rather than trying to force fit your problem to a particular ideology or a way of approaching marketing, the great thing with behavioural science is that there is no grand uber theory. You've got all these biases. It's now up to you as a marketer to select the bias that's most relevant to your problem.
100%.
Yeah,
They're all tools.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. One last question, then I'm going to let you go. I did not prepare you for this, so I'm putting you on the spot. What 3 books, not written by you, do you recommend for people that would like the Choice Factory? Are there books that are either covered in your bibliography or just books that you recommend?
So, in terms of a book about behavioural science that is very related to marketing, there's a wonderful one called Decoded, which is by Phil Barton.
Oh God, I love it. Phil Barton.
And written probably 6 or 7 years ago, so probably one of the first in this field. So that's fantastic. There's a book called Inside the Nudge Unit, which is by David Halpern. So he was CEO of the Behavioural Insights team, so the UK government's team that was established to apply behavioural science to policy. It's a very, very simple, easy to read book, but he has a wealth of examples about applying behavioural science beyond just marketing. So some of it's communications and some of it's policy. And then the third one, I'd probably go just for his wonderful, brilliantly chaotic mind, probably The Wiki Man by Rory Sutherland. So often talks about the same biases as other people, but he has just got such a fertile imagination. He always just uses it to jump off into a completely different direction. So that's another wonderful book on the topic.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. His perspective just adds a lot
and
to
actually,
all
I
the
think
ideas.
if people aren't aware of Rory Sutherland, the best place to start would probably be some of these TED Talks. He packs an amazing amount into 18 minutes. Things like Life Lessons of an Ad Man is a wonderful bit of footage.
Yeah, and of both Inside the Nudge Unit and Sutherland, not specifically Wikiman, but both of those things were covered on Freakonomics, which you can find podcasts on that and get a little bit of a sneak peek if you don't have time to read the book right away. But great episodes of and looks at both of those.
Excellent.
All right. Well, Richard, this has been awesome. Thank you for taking time out of your evening. And I know we were trying to set this up for a little while. I'm sorry I couldn't make it when you came to the U.S. I was missed you by a couple days.
Not at all. I'm hoping at some stage to come back. So maybe Chicago or LA next time.
Oh, perfect. Give me a heads up, and I will try to be there. Or let
actually,
people know
on this, if you did have any advice, because I know New York was the biggest kind of advertising city in America. I don't know if you've got a view on what the next biggest would be. Is that in LA?
I would probably say Chicago, maybe Boston.
Oh wow, okay.
Minneapolis.
Boston, Minneapolis.
You would do well in Boston too because there's so many schools there, and there's so many people that would enjoy learning about just the topics of the book, and the research you've done is really useful.
Okay, well, that's a good shout. I hadn't thought of either of Boston or Minneapolis, so I will look into those two. But and it's a nice.
Don't go to Minneapolis or Boston in the winter, though. You gotta get there before it starts snowing, or you'll hate life. Yeah. You'll be cursing me. Richard, where can people find you online?
Twitter is one place. So at @rshotton. I promise people they will see no photos of my family or love of West Ham. It's all about social psychology and advertising. So I'm quite a prolific tweeter. And my main...
And you hide all the West Ham?
I don't ever tweeted about West Ham. I think I once broke my rule and tweeted about Mo Farah. I got a bit excited during the Olympics. My normal thing on Twitter is if I'm reading a book, and it'll be about advertising or psychology, if I come across an interesting experiment, take a photo of it and stick it online, and just share interesting experiments I read about.
Very good. Well, this has been awesome. And thank you so much again for making time. The book is called Choice Factory, and it's available everywhere. I know it's available on Amazon because it keeps reminding me that you're ahead of me in the rankings.
Oh, it's been very good to speak to you, Adam.
Good to speak to you too, man. Thank you very much.